Hey everybody, welcome to DBS Films Podcast. My name is Kellen. With me, as always, is my brother Brendan, and together we make movies with DBS Films. In today's episode, we're doing a scene-by-scene breakdown of the ninth movie, which is The Girl in Cabin 13. You can also see this movie on Tubi for free. You can see our new movie, The Haunting of the Murder House, and you can also see Into the Forest on Tubi as well. So feel free to go ahead and check those out. Be sure to take a look at our Discord channel because that is the place to be if you want to make movies with us. If you want to be in these movies, that's the community that we look to cast from. So be sure to take a look at that. Super fun. A lot of things to do in there, regardless of just making movies. So, Girl in Cabin 13, I'm really excited for this scene by scene breakdown because, as we kind of were making our way through the, Hateful Eight, we were seeing a lot of progression. We were seeing scenes come together. We were seeing ideas solidify. And I think, as a combination, the Morgan Estate and the Devil in the Room was really a big milestone for us because it allowed us, once we got through the painful process of making those movies, get through the actual post-production process, which was just a complete nightmare. Things began to solidify more in the sense of, us understanding, okay, we're going to take more of a direct control over this. We're simply going to avoid a lot of these problems by never writing them in there. I just think there was such a huge shift in mentality. And albeit, I mean, it was about a year and a half to get through the editing process due to COVID and just different things as well, too. But what do you see as that, big gap? Because I really am always going to look, I think, the Devil in the Room to The Girl in Cabin 13 is probably going to be the biggest gap potentially we see. Now, with me saying that, I'm sure we can always surprise ourselves.
Yeah, so I think you're correct. It was definitely the largest jump as far as like production goes. And I think it was, with two things. The first was that because COVID happened, we weren't allowed to shoot for a year. So that allowed us to edit Devil in the Room and Morgan Estate. So we had both those up. We essentially had 8 movies that we could go back and look and like essentially watch. I remember when we went to Barcelona, we watched all 8 of them. And it not only allowed us to look at them from a top-down view and figure out the story problems, the issues with pacing, but also the production aspect of it, which is just equally as important. We had a lot of holdups as far as just having too many people on our crew, people that were not adding enough value to the production, having a lot of communication issues on my end. And I think Girl in Cabin 13 really, we really just took a look at this stuff and we went back and made the story very simple and we made the cast and crew very simple. So we went from a larger crew down to essentially just me, my brother, and the cast, and that's it. And when we made that shift, because I was actually shooting the movie myself, I was really only communicating with myself and the actor. So instead of, being a director and then having to communicate your vision with the DP, and then you have to communicate both what the DP is going to do and your direction that you want to give the actors, there's just a lot of moving pieces in there. And I think it's very difficult as an indie director for your first couple of movies to really take that vision that you have in your head and, make it or be able to communicate it properly so that your team can make that actual film. And I think the first 8 films were not the film that I had in my head. They had issues, they were different, the tone was off, everything was kind of just a little wonky because it's almost like you're trying to communicate your vision through all these people. It's very difficult to do that. But I think The Girl in Cabin 13 was the first time where we finished that movie, and that was the movie that was in my head. And when that happens, it allows you to go back and really be like, all right, look, I made the movie that I wanted to make. This is exactly how it was in my head. And if it gets bad reviews or there's issues with it, then that becomes a story problem. And I think this is a milestone for us. And I think it's a milestone that you need to strive for as an indie filmmaker is to make the movie that's in your head. And once you get that bare bones foundation, that is essentially your foundation. Then you can start working on story problems. You can work with the actors a little bit more because you have confidence that that vision that you have in your head, you can translate it into a final uploaded product.
I definitely agree with that, and I think, the biggest thing that you mentioned right there is getting it close to that vision on paper, that you really have, and I think that is very much the case with The Girl in Cabin 13, and to me, actually highlights what I kinda think is, one of the major issues with Girl in Cabin 13 before we hop in. Curious to see what you think. This was always one where I was like, "Man, there's, like, no plot here." I was basically just like, very straightforward. Essentially, to give you guys the plot idea here, there is a couple that get scared in the beginning of the movie. They go out to the cabin, three masked men show up, and it's not good for them. There's a little tiny pinch of something going on with Instagram influencer type stuff, but we pulled back from that. So I just wanted to, before we hop in there, this was intentionally basic. This was intentionally simple. This was intentionally dipping our feet back into the water, at least in my opinion, in the sense that I think the biggest issues this movie had were self-inflicted for the purpose that you want to make it simple. We still basically almost ran out of time in filming with The Girl in Cabin 13 due to some delays with special effects. So, you want to set yourself up for the easiest production, especially with the changes that we made. So, would you say that's kind of the case where we wanted to find a simple, low hanging fruit idea, just build around that?
Yeah, and I wish I would have figured this out earlier. I wish instead of Gone and The Invited, we would have done simple movies like this because I think as an indie filmmaker, to tell a complicated story is almost impossible. I mean, we still struggled to tell the story of Girl in Cabin 13. So, like we're go back and look at The Invited. Like you just can't tell that story on a budget and you can't tell that story without experience. And I think my number one advice to all new filmmakers would just be like, look, if this is your first feature, one location, a couple actors, and just almost remove the plot. Make the actions and the dialogue and everything drive the plot forward. So essentially, take your characters, put them in a situation, and push this movie as fast as you can to the climax. And I think if you can do that, which, like I said before, this is like our foundation moving forward. If you can pull off a movie in one location with limited actors, limited plot, and it just moves, the pacing's very good, well, then your next movie, you can add a little bit more depth to your characters. Maybe you can add another location. You can always scale up that way. But I see a lot of filmmakers, they make the mistake of multiple locations, multiple characters, a ton of character backstory. When you have a lot of character backstory and only an hour and 20 minutes to tell that story, you're going to get stuff like the Morgan Estate. You're going to get stuff like The Devil in the Room, where it just lagged, it's not paced well. Where I think if you just take a movie, have, take your actors, put them in a situation, preferably have it happen all in one night. If you can do that and you can do it successfully, that gives you that foundation to just kind of scale up. Which with each movie after the Cabin 13, we've added a little bit more character depth, we've added a little bit more story, and it's just easier to do it this way as opposed to doing something grand like The Invited, which has had so many characters and so much plot and so much backstory. To pace that properly is just very, very difficult. The Girl in Cabin 13 did very well on all its platforms because it was a simple story. And I think you just got to start with the most minimalistic idea possible and just kind of scale up as you get better as a filmmaker.
Completely agree. Again, just wanted to highlight that because I think that is the best path forward that you really want to go ahead and end up taking. So, that being said, let's go ahead and hop into The Girl in Cabin 13. I mean, this is always going to be a movie that we look back on fondly. I think it's one that you can start watching and being like, okay, I really see what's going on here. And it also probably has a little bit more unique of an intro scene in the sense of, typically we start on like a super high note of like scared, screaming, things are moving right away. But there's actually like a minute long montage scene. And I think it really just kind of goes back to, she's making dinner, she's kind of talking there. So like before we even get to that pop scare, do you want to just talk about how motion is action, like having her moving, having her doing the montage, having all of these things, it's much different than the typical scream in the woods to kick off our movies, but it works because there is motion, there is movement. People like it. We did pick a good song to match with it. And like before you know it, you just flow right through that.
Yeah, as an indie filmmaker, definitely lean into montages. If you can cut them to music, it's kind of a cheat code because you can use, like a 50 or an 85 really tight lens, and then you can kind of, make it look really cinematic. I mean, this is just her cutting and cooking things. It's very easy to shoot this stuff right off the bat. You think there's like some production value to this movie, and if you can do that, it's good. And I wanted to try and get a longer intro with this one, just to try and change it up a little bit from, the other movies that we did. We wanted to show, I mean, I don't really know why we did the cooking. I think honestly, we did it just because it looks good. I don't remember it being like a plot or anything like that. Oh, I think we wanted to show that she's like an Instagram person because I think the original
Yep.
cut, here's like the director's cut. We had we had her do this huge meal, like cook this entire meal, take it on Instagram, and then throw it in the trash, right? To show that like she wasn't even eating the meal, she just wanted the likes to show the social media engagement. The problem was when I showed it to a lot of fans and friends and family people, they thought she was bulimic and that she had an eating disorder. And we're just like, oh no. Multiple people told me this. So I just ended up cutting it, and I don't think it's even brought up. I think just people assume she ate it. But the whole point of that scene while we did the cooking, now that I remember, is we wanted to show that she's so sucked into social media that she would have done this 2-hour prep time to make this meal and then throw it away like it was nothing. But once again, this is why you show people this movie before you release it, because that was the feedback 3 or 4 people said. And I was like, all right, well, we got to cut that.
And then you'd explain it to them, and they'd be like, "Oh, well, now I hate this character even more because this is
Yeah, they
terrible."
didn't like her after that. So yeah, we're not starting off hot with likable characters in this one.
Sorry about that, Chloe. We apologize as always. But yeah, again, montage absolutely fantastic. Still able to scrap it, even though the fact that we pulled away our joke that we thought was a hilarious joke. So then very basic pop scare. Honestly, I cannot tell you the amount of people who, typically I'll every once in a while I'll be doing like a live stream or something, and people will start watching the movie. And they do react to that moment of just a straight up pop scare. Sonny's walking back, literally just some dude standing up with a clown mask on. Very, very, very loud sound effect to kind of get you jolted there. But I mean, that's what you got to do. Again, people aren't watching your movie at this point in time. They put it on. And now that you slammed a noise on them, you see what's going on. We hit it with the 1-2 because we know, you know what? Alarms are spooky thanks to the haunting of the suicide house. So we move right into the alarm scene. Doors open, a la the unseen. So now you're scared. Call the cops. Get a nice little dark suspense moment. Leave on a bit of a cliffhanger. Bam, title. So I think again, I think it's weak in the sense of like we didn't really have a story. So you like you can't really do much. You can't build to the story or do something like that. You're kind of setting up why they want to get away, but with the ingredients that we had plot wise, I think this is like the perfect example of the execution there. Quick little montage up there. They establish they're a couple. We establish she likes Instagram, and then boom, you get the pop scare, and we'll just hop with these, and then we'll talk about after Officer Reynolds there. But how do you feel about the end action of the intro scene?
I mean, I think it's solid. I mean, you nailed the 3 things that we wanted to do. Is like, all right, these guys are a couple. She has some kind of social media addiction, and there's a threat outside. There's like a stalker. How we did it could have been better, I think. But we're pulling from things that we learned from the first 8 movies, the stuff that we did well. We knew that pop cigar was going to work. We knew the door being open is creepy. We knew the alarm going off, and it's not boring. It's very fast paced. You have the alarm tension going on in there. We're blasting like scary music. So, it's not boring. It's engaging. Is it done very well? Not really, but it's done well enough to get people's attention. I just really hate the 911 call. I cannot stand that. It's just so cheap and like just not good. But I just don't know another way to do that, to transition that to Officer Reynolds without just a hard cut. Because I feel like the hard cut would be even cheaper. So, if I was gonna do this movie again, I'd definitely think something better, but don't cut to audio only. I see a lot of movies that do it. I think you can do it in the beginning and show stuff, but don't take away the climax from the viewer. So we built like this nice little sequence, and then we just take it away from the viewer with a black dialogue of police stuff. I think that was kind of, if anything, with the intro, that was the thing that I had the biggest issue with. It just, I don't know. I wanted to see what happened, and I think we just needed to find a way to do that better. And then I would think we would have had a really really good opening. But for the most part, look, it's not boring. It moves very quickly. I think it is a solid intro. People started watching it and they continued all the way through, watching this movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think it solves what we needed to solve, which is basically what you were saying right there. And again, I've seen much more of the ones that we've done. So you do break back into Officer Reynolds, and this is kind of our dialogue dump. I would say lukewarm if I have to look at scenes. It is shot nice with a little blue light in the background before we overblew ourselves, and we'll never use that again. But a little back and forth. You have Officer Reynolds being the legend of Officer Reynolds, where if you guys haven't seen the rest of our movies, he's by far the most like passive aggressive police officer you'll ever deal with. So I kind of love that he reprised his role, but essentially it just says, hey, you need to get out there and go. But I think again, like this scene being shot well carries it. If there was like some movement to it and whatnot, it'd be better. But again, this is like, if you're gonna have a static scene, get ready to get your scene picked apart. And if you at least have a good looking scene, you can kind of get through it. But overall, I'll give it a lukewarm. What do you kind of think?
Yeah, I think it runs a little long. There's some dialogue that states the same things over and over again. So it's like, looking at this now, what do we want to accomplish? We want to show that Officer Reynolds didn't find anybody there. We want to kind of put the seed in the doubt of Chloe's character, where she's like, I saw something, but no one else saw it, which is really not a good plot device. Like, we should have never done that. Because then already immediately into this movie, Brad's character and Sonny's character are having conflicts of difference. Like, he believes her, but does he really believe her? I don't really think so. So, and Officer Reynolds thinks they're both idiots. So that's a problem. The only goal from this is that they couldn't find anything. Officer Reynolds couldn't find anything. And he said he suggests for them to go somewhere else for the weekend to get their mind off things. That's it. We just need an excuse. Someone needs to tell them to go on vacation. And, because we needed a reason for them to go to the cabin. That's it. And I think we probably had like a minute or 2 minutes of just dialogue here, which, once again, this could have been cleaned up. And, we could have just started with them going to the cabin. It could have been a vacation movie. But, if we're going to use that intro, we definitely needed something to kind of link it together. But it could have been done, with Occam's razor, much sharper. And if you did want to do a scene like this, I think it would have been a lot better if we were following, Officer Reynolds around looking through the house, like in that back room, being like, hey, I don't see anything, checking the door, being like, there's no signs of, break-ins here. And then you would have had movement. We could have done like the Ronin shots and just had them stop and set up and deliver the dialogue. I think if you would have done that, it would have been way more engaging than just, leaning over that table. So I think if we would have done that, though, it would taken a lot more time. And I remember we weren't pushing time on this one, but it was getting to the point where, I was getting tired, and I think the cast was getting tired. So that would be my only thing, would be just sharpen up the dialogue if we want to, do this scene again, or if we want the longer takes, do it through, a lot of movement, like Kel said.
100%. I think the movement was really what I was thinking of. You just cut to kind of Reynolds making his way through there, and then maybe a cut there. Maybe, like you cut from the phone call to Reynolds pulling up, and you don't really know. You get another Sonny Pop scare. There's a lot you can kind of do there. But I think to me, this was just, again, this was probably the most sensitive we were on a film shoot that we've ever been on, in the sense of like, is this going to work? Okay, cool. Is this going to work? Okay. So I would say we were just kind of timid in the execution there. So we're just like, all right, how do we just get this done? They go on their merry way driving, which again, I mean, honestly, not just because I did the drone work myself, so that means, I'm the best. But I think it was really well done. Like if you're going to use cars, kind of use it this way. We pulled over, so it allowed for easier viewing and whatnot. And I think if you look at every single indie movie, you're gonna have this transition shot. So we'll just quickly talk about like cars, how to use them, not use them, because we kind of hate them, but we also essentially almost always use them for trips like this.
Yeah, I mean, you can use cars, just don't do dialogue stuff in the car. And, I think the worst shot stuff in this whole movie was the car stuff. Poor Stewart's face is just like profiled in on this one shot, but it's just you don't have a lot of space. I was literally almost outside that window trying to get that shot. So, dialogue in cars, you really only have one option, which is the back seat, and that's going to get the back of their heads. Not very engaging. I'd avoid it. I think it's an indie pitfall unless you have some kind of like special camera rig in Hollywood where they actually can, properly get the distance from the lens to get the proper focal length. I would avoid these things. But gets it done. It just shows that they're kind of lost out here. There's no cell phone signal. There's no GPS, and we had kind of a little cool map transition thing. I don't know if it really worked too well, but I mean, it wasn't boring. We're trying new stuff, which is kind of cool. So the car scene gets the job done. I think this is the whole like thing with this movie. It gets the job done. It doesn't do anything great, but it doesn't do anything absolutely horrible to make you turn it off. You're just kind of like, all right, that was a nice little home invasion movie, and that's really what we're going for. And as an indie filmmaker, that's what you should be going for too.
Completely agree. So we got our nice little transition that I thought was great because I know we hyped it up so much. So don't sell yourself short there. We nailed it. Then we get to the cabin. Cabin's a nice location. Really looks like a spooky-ish cabin in the sense of cabin feel. Pull up, pop out, and then we get what we now, I will say, have a staple of in every single one of our movies, which is the first real plot dump in the sense of her talking to her audience, which we've used in the Haunting the Murder House as well too. And then now we have Roger talking to the group in the shapeshifter. But essentially, this conversation is typically presented to someone who doesn't know what's going on, aka Sunny talking to her followers, the other side talking to the streamers or the stream following, or Roger talking to the group of people who are there for the shapeshifter in our next three movies. But this scene is basically used for the trailer in the sense that it allows us to quickly, cut things up, and weave it together and make a really, really solid trailer because it's explaining essentially the setup to the plot for the first time. So I think it does a fantastic job in the sense of, just explaining everything. But do I talk about as an indie filmmaker? We're 12 minutes here into the movie. We have kind of some very basic stuff, but this is the first point where we're going to basically we're going to sit down and explain exactly what's going on and why you always want to do that.
I out of all the scenes in this movie, this is one of my favorite ones because they get out of the car. It's super engaging because Sonny is almost talking to the viewer. You have multiple cuts with Brad that look very good, and it just flows really well. And the goal was exactly what you said, just explain to the audience, all right, what are they doing in this cabin? Oh, they're here for the weekend, and there's no cell phone to get rid of that plot device immediately. It's super engaging. There's a lot of movement. It looks good outside. I really thought it was good. I thought it was a great scene. So right now the movie's flowing pretty well. And I think, the one thing that we suffered from in Devil in the Room and Morgan State is people didn't understand what was going on. And through Reynolds, through that small little car scene, and then now with her narrating to her viewers, this is three touches on exactly the plot of this movie. There's people stalking her, watching her. The officer told them to get away for a couple days, and now she's going to this remote cabin without any cell phone service. Perfect. Now we can just move forward to the next sequence because everyone's on the same page. They know what's going on, and we can start to actually build this story.
Completely agree. So we have that coming in there where they're walking around. This is if you heard us, I believe it's 2 movies ago or something. We were talking about it, but the Joe Pop scare where he's coming out, little cheap one, in the sense where Joe is our basically Airbnb manager in this film for them, and he basically pops out of the bathroom for a little cheap pop scare there. Now, I am going to continue to say that we will always be using these because you only have a limited of these like cheap lesser pop scares, but it's just one of those ones where like angles can play, a huge difference. It's kind of tricky there. It's still kind of daylight out. So of all the scares, it's probably the weakest one, but I still think it serves its purpose of at least trying to be there. And the line that you always, are running when it comes to these pop scares is it too corny that like people are almost kind of upset at you for scaring them with that? Or is it just too boring because you don't have anything? I think it was more on kind of the cheaper side of things, but I'd rather be cheap than boring any day.
Yeah, the bathroom was really tiny in this one, and the cabin just didn't have any good like pop scare things. And it had this crazy that was like a cave shower. So it was kind of like a crazy thing. So we're like, all right, let's try it here. But I said you want to really make this movie much better. Just have him get to the cabin at night. Easily could have just had them at the cabin at night and it would have been way scarier. Like you could have had, the door open and going in there and been like, who it is, who's in here, and then Joe pops out there. Or you can have them, actually go up to that bathroom and Joe pops out of the shower. But here's an indie filmmaker tip: don't ever do a pop scare from a profile, like where the actors at profile view. It's never going to work. It's like, why does found footage work so well? Because you're the viewer, you are literally looking around. It's very engaging. And I think we actually did it through like a mirror, but then we cut to profile. It just wasn't good. But I remember that bathroom just being very tiny and difficult to work with. But I think it just highlights what Kel said. If you're gonna swing and miss, swing and miss. It's better to miss on something because at least people will be like, all right, well, this movie's like trying to do something, as opposed to just being boring. I think people are gonna turn a movie off when there's not anything happening. But if there's like at least some stuff happening as far as like pop scares or at least attempts at pop scares, I think people, yeah, they'll be like, hey, that was kind of cheap. Like, oh, come on. But they're going to keep watching, which is just, that's the whole goal is to just get these people to watch your movie and watch it all the way through.
Yep, that is really one of the biggest things is, making sure you are engaging. So even though it is more or less of a miss, it really is one of those things where you still want to have something there. And I agree. You get there at night, you get the door open, it's a lot more spooky, a lot more stakes. But again, we didn't have all the night to work with. So we go right into the tour. And I will say, honestly, the tour does build a lot more lore. It builds the lore about the cabin, builds the lore about, no one's here, builds the lore about you're all out here by yourself. But it's well done. And then, we'll go right into the outdoor walking montage as well, too. As these are just kind of two build-ups. So again, movement looks really, really good. The cinematography is good in the sense that like it's interesting. We're moving, we're shifting, we're having them go here. Joe gets to the door and then he delivers stuff. Joe's at the counter. So this is huge compared to some of the massive issues that we had with like the Morgan estate where they sit down and just talk. These dialogue dumps have we done like what we did in our past movies. They're at 3 different locations, 3 different angles right now for that. And it just allows it to flow much better. So I think you're really starting to see how we're handling the downbeats a lot better in this. I think you probably could have simplified this a lot more. If you look at it overall, I would say this is definitely the drag point of the movie. Like right here, we got the next montage of them walking in the woods, which is really good. But because the Joe Pop scare doesn't really hit, I think this is kind of the drag point. But overall, this drag point compared to like the Devil in the Room or the Morgan Estate is so much better. And I think that's one of the things that I see that you might not really notice it if you're not a filmmaker, but if you are a filmmaker, you can see that like we're just getting so much better at these downbeats and not having them be so brutal to get through the plot.
Yeah. And I think I completely agree. I think it can be sped up a lot. Like we're really, After I think the jump from Girl in Cabin 13 to Murder House, the biggest jump was just really making sure the dialogue was very minimalistic. What are the goals we're trying to accomplish, and how do we get to that goal with the least amount of lines? For this scene, the only thing that we need to bring up is there's a plot device with that phone that's going to be used later. So we need to say there's no cell phone service out here. The only way to get in contact with them is with that landline phone. Then the second thing is the dialogue that he delivers over by the door, the front door, is why are the masked men when they come there not breaking the windows? And we just address that plot hole point blank and say, hey, look, these are bulletproof windows. And then I think like the other thing we need to accomplish is there's no one else near you for miles. So like you have to, once you're in this situation, you can't leave unless you have your car, because we're going to slash the tires later on. So it was, the plot points are, this is the only phone, your cell phones won't work. If something happens to this phone, you're kind of in trouble. If the masked men can't get into the house because there's bulletproof windows because they're preppers. And then it's, all right, look, there's nobody anywhere near you. Those are three things that we need to have Joe explain, or the beats that we have to hit with the dialogue. And this is like a pretty long sequence. I think we could have just sat down and really figured out, with him probably just starting to the phone, being like, hey, this is the only phone. Hey, these windows are bulletproof, so you don't need to worry about, I think it was like bears or something. And then look, you're in the middle of nowhere. There's really no one to help you. Were the objectives that we needed to actually, convey to the audience. And we just went too long. Like we were just saying things over and over and over again. Is repeated dialogue. You already knew there was no cell phone service from the car. So you could just had Sonny been like, hey, like, I know we have no cell phone service here, but like, what do we do? To communicate with you if there's a problem with the Airbnb. And that's when you get the landline phone. And then Joe himself would have to bring up the bulletproof windows. I think that's just something he needs to say. But he brings it up with the owner being a prepper. And then like the fact that no one else is out there is already brought up because, it's very hard to find the place. It's very remote. And Joe says like the nearest police station's like 50 miles away or something like that. So a lot of that stuff we're repeating. And I think the difference between an amateur screenwriter and a screenwriter who's very seasoned is a screenwriter who's very seasoned can consistently push the movie forward with dialogue. Where when we were first starting out with our scripts, or the examples I just gave you in Girl in Cabin 13, we're kind of repeating the same thing, or we have unnecessary dialogue. If I could go back, I could probably clean a lot of this stuff out, which would speed up the pace of the movie. So like Kel said, we don't have this little lull area, which allows us, number one, get into the meat of the movie, which is when the masked men, show up. That's the hook point. We want to get there as quickly as possible. And I'd rather spend time on the climax or the more intense scenes as opposed to, essentially establishing the rules. Right now, we're establishing the rules of the world. It's like, look, they're safe as long as they're inside this cabin. And, obviously that's a huge plot point, but how we got there was just kind of muddied. It was kind of, all over the place. So I really think, once again, it's good. Like it's not the best. And I think better screenwriting, knowing what we know now as far as screenwriting, would have cleaned this up. And I think you would have just had a much faster paced movie, because you can pretty much consolidate the car scene to her talking to herself to the Joe Pop scare. Honestly, make that like one sequence. And it would have been sped up a lot more. Or if you just get the Joe Pop scare to hit, I think people would have been a little bit more engaged in the movie.
Completely agree. I think, as I was mentioning, the Joe Pop scare kind of being weaker is what really emphasizes the drag element to it. But I mean, like you go back to Devil and you go back to Morgan Estate, and I think you go back to any one of our movies, there's kind of a drag here. I think the only movie that we've kind of skipped that drag now is The Haunted, the Murder House, because we're just kind of plowing through it full steam ahead. So with that being said, we have the other montage of them walking through the woods. Honestly, anytime you can do that is really good in that sense of like montage is great, outdoors is great. I think it looks great in our shapeshifter one. Then we cut to her being addicted to social media for a little bit. So it's like, hey, let's come on, let's take a video here. They take the quick little video to kind of get a little bit of character development, and then they leave. I think right here, I do want to kind of address one thing. So, we'll say montages are good, and I think the scene overall works. But I think we start falling in the trap here that we've learned. And I think the biggest takeaway from like the overall of this movie is when you only have two characters, you really want them to be almost as supportive as like humanly possible, because one of them basically has to almost kind of be like, well, we can't go, or you have to figure out a way to make that smart. And I think right here where you kind of get Brad teasing Sonny, Sonny kind of being Sonny, it kind of pulls a little bit from the characters. But I would say overall, this character development of them out here, you understand what's going on and what they're doing. I think the only slight thing I would say is like, you really want them to be optimistic and happy more so than like, even if it's slight, I still think it's something where like still try and err on that side.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, this is the foundation. If I were to do this movie again, yeah, I put a lot of time into trying figuring out little things that they could do to really, make their relationship look like it's super solid. And, obviously you can have Brad have a ring and do the traditional wedding proposal thing. He's taking her out there to propose, which I've seen done in a million indie movies. It works. All right, it's like an easy cheat code to be like, all right, this person's obviously invested in this other person. I think we could do it with smarter ways. I think we'd be more clever. But like, if you were to give me this script and be like, all right, like make this movie, that would be my number one priority, is making sure these people are likable and they both really care about them, each other. And we do that with the camera scene. Like he gives her the camera, and that's actually done pretty well. The problem is you only do it once. The rest of the movie is them kind of bitching at each other. So I think you have to have, almost like we were talking about with plot and how you're explaining to the audience, you have to do touches with their relationship. You have to do small little gestures, or gestures to make sure that the audience understands that they really like and care, so that when one of them gets in danger, like their motivations are proper. And I think a lot of it is the dialogue in this movie. Just we just didn't give an opportunity to really, connect properly through dialogue. We used one scene, which was the camera scene, to really show that they loved each other, which I don't think was enough. So I mean, I see it all the time though. It's like indie films, they just have hateable characters. You get a lot of hate. And it's tough to write likable characters, because I also think it's not only the dialogue that you write, but their actions and their body language. And, I think if you had just had both of them like touching each other and, hugging or kissing or doing whatever we could possibly do to just, make them more fun and loving, I think that would have went a long way. So, that's my thoughts on that. I think that was probably the biggest issue with this movie, is you don't like either the characters, and I think that only gets compounded because there's only two characters. And I think that's what really got us in trouble with this movie, was we had two unlikable characters, and there was no, other than Joe, there was nobody else in this movie. So there's a lot of feedback where a lot of people were like, hey, I was rooting for Carl, and I can understand that. But it's like, all right, this is the lesson from this one. It's like, if you're doing a couple movie, it's very difficult, because at some point they're going to gaslight each other. I think you're seeing the difference between this and when we do Shapeshifter, where we have four different people. It's a lot easier to rotate that gaslighting around and make group decisions, as opposed to, should we stare, should we go? Because at some point you're going to have that situation, and they both can't be like, yes. So that's just the difficulty of doing these home invasion movies with two couples or with one couple. It's going to be difficult. It's a difficult thing to write. And you're just going to have to, really pay attention to how you're making these people like each other.
Completely agree. And I think, again, a lot of the bounce back you see, because we finished the movie, because we completed it, because we have the haunt in the murder house now, you can see a lot of the bounce back from it. Because yeah, having two characters is super tough, even though Carl is supposed to be the main character and hero. So speaking of our hero, we are following Brad now, just walking through the woods, and he comes across our clown. Carl out in the woods. He's sitting there. He's spooky. I think we did a great job with this one. I think maybe the run scene's a little long, kind of following Brad a bit, but like, he pops out, you have the encounter, and like to me, this is a scene that like when we get people watching it or test watching it invokes the oh my god, I'm gonna get out of there moment. Like I would just leave. Like, what's going on? Like, what are you doing? And that's really what you want. You want to have that moment. What would you do? Do with clown mask, turn around, start walking, he's following you, turn back around, he's not there, turn around, boom, he's there, and then he sprints after you. So I think this Carl running scene is really well done. I'd say above average.
Yeah, to me, it's like a little flat. And I don't know why it's flat. This is something similar to like in the murder house, the lock-in room sequence. Do I think it's decent? Yes, but it should be spicier. This should really be a good scene. I honestly think it's if we would have done it at night, I think that's what it's just missing. It's just missing the tension of being in the woods at night. But it does create like a massive plot hole where Stewart sees this crazy masked man stalking him. And I'll tell you what, if I'm out there in the woods in this cabin and I see this clown guy after me, I'm leaving him 1 star and I'm leaving this Airbnb. I'm not messing around in these woods. So the fact that Stewart goes and runs back inside and is like, yeah, nothing was out there, not a problem. That's a pretty big plot hole. And I think we knew that, but I think we were just like, all right, well, they can't just leave now. But I think the way you fix this is you just do it in one night. He's out there at night, or they're both out there at night. They see that guy. They get scared. They go back to, back inside the cabin, and they're like, "All right, we're out of here. We're leaving." And then the masked men just show up at the door right there. Then they can't leave, and then your plot hole is solved in a way that's smart. So yeah, you kind of lose that knocking sequence, but I don't think that was like very good to begin with. Um, and your movie's is paced much better because, like I said before, the hook point of this movie is when Carl and the 3 masked men are outside the door. And I'm already making this happen 15 minutes earlier just by changing this. It should have happened right after um, this scene because she can go back, they can start packing their things. And then if you still want to do the knock scare, you can still do the knock stuff. And it's those guys outside. So I think just speed it up. Occam's razor. You can get rid of the camera scene and you can get rid of the wine drinking scene and just find smaller ways to do little touches. And I think you just would have had a better movie.
Yeah, no, I do completely agree. I think it really comes down to just, one or two little improvements in the sense of pacing, getting things up there. I think you're right with it being at night, but still for what it's at and what it's doing, I think it's really well done. From there, we get back. Brad has his one good boyfriend moment where he gets her a camera. Thanks so much for that. And then he immediately begins to gaslight her. So we get the camera. I mean, it's an okay scene, like this is not gonna be a special scene to begin with. Then we loop in a little bit of a scare, which was good, which is the trash can scare to the Carl's being a little bit sneaky scare. And I think those scares are really good. So you have a okay downbeat, but a decent scare in the sense that okay, they're being surrounded. So that's really, really good in my sense. What do you think of that little two combo we had?
Yeah, trash can scare was like one of our higher rated scares, which is absolutely hilarious. But it shows you how important audio is. Like, really, that scare is just you're not expecting someone to just slam a trash can on you. So that's kind of like that's one where you're like, ah, you got me, but it was cheap, but you got me. And I think we did it in the murder house with the chandelier glass thing falling down. Like anything breaking or trash can slamming or anything like that always creates a really cool noise. And it's just what's the least, expected thing. You always want to have like the least expected thing happen. If you're outside, you're in the middle of the woods, you're looking, we have a slow pan in on the opening in the forest, and all of a sudden someone slams a trash can. Like you're just like, what is this? But it worked, and it was a good transition, good cuts, and then we had like a little cool little moment where Carl's kind of like watching them from the woods. So you're building that tension. And this was the problem with like the Devil in the Room, for example. There was no tension there. The Morgan said there was no tension. I think people really liked this movie why it had the highest engagement of any of our movies was immediately building the tension. Just small little things showing like what's going to happen. You're foreshadowing that these masked men are going to, kill them. And you're doing it in a way that's it's kind of clever. There's pop scares in there, but you're doing it earlier in the movie. And so I think all that stuff's really good. The problem is this should have been done like if they were going to come in there, like it should have been done earlier. This scene should have been done before them seeing Carl in the woods. Because when you see Carl in the woods, you're messing with your tension because that was such a wild scene. Now you kind of go down for a little pop scare. And so your actual like momentum of like how these scares should hit, because as you slowly build, you should have the less scares like the Joe Pop scare all the way up to you finally seeing Carl like slamming the windows and stuff. It needs to be a slow build. And I think that kind of messes it up because that one in the woods is so intense. And then the next scare is like this trash can scare. I mean, once again, it's not boring, but it could be done better. But dude, one of the hardest things is to figure out if these pop scares are going to hit and where you should place them, because it's just hindsight's 2020 trying to figure out. If you were to tell me which one of these scares was going to hit and be the best, I would have not said this trash can scare. I don't think it was the best, but I think it hit harder than the Carl in the woods scare.
So from now on, every single movie will have trash cans. Just watch out, guys. But yeah, no, I think you're completely right. You never know with like timing and pacing and where you're placing them, what's going to end up working. So you have that. And the last scene that we'll have for this half of the scene by scene breakdown is, just our beginning of just expert level gaslighting by Brad, which is the camera glitch scene. I think it works. It's really good. It's kind of like spooky. It's like, oh, that's the person that he saw. But accomplishing this point just puts Brad in such a bad light, in the sense of like, this is where, I argue for Brad a lot, because we'll get to the point where he sacrifices himself. So I say he's neutral. But man, at this point, he really kind of loses all points and goes into negative territory by basically saying, he's straight up gaslighting her. So again, I think this is just an issue with having multiple people. But then also, this is something where, like, in hindsight writing, this would be something where, as you were mentioning, maybe this is where they're trying to leave and they find this. And then bam, that's when the masked men show up, versus kind of what we see happening here. But what are your thoughts on the whole, it's a glitch, it's in there? I know we reused it, so obviously you like how it played out. But I think this is just where Brad gets put on the cross for the first time.
Yeah, I think this scene's gonna go on the ban list. This one's all right. It's just long to get through, and it's really not that creepy. We did it again in the shapeshifter, and once again, I don't think it's very good in the shapeshifter. But I think it makes more sense in the shapeshifter movie. Once again, you're kind of sliding back down. They've both seen this, or they haven't both seen it. It's Chloe's first time seeing the masked men, but Stuart's seen them, and really they should be one unit. Like, I think that's the problem, is that there's no suspense or tension if Chloe hasn't seen this guy. What's our objective there? We're trying to hide it from her, so there's like some kind of reveal, and there is a reveal scene, and it's just extreme gaslighting. So I don't know. I think if I were to do this movie again, I would scrap this, and they both just see Carl in the woods, and they both want to leave. And I mean, if anything, they could have looked back through the pictures or something and seen that Carl was following them for a much longer time. I guess that would have been scarier. But really, I think if you're going to go all out and really get this movie paced well and get going, I think you just kind of cut this scene, because it's showing that, something's there. It looks good. It's shot pretty well, but it's just not, once again, we really kind of spiked early seeing Carl in the woods, and now our pacing's off and the scares are off. And I think everyone right now, if you're watching this movie, is like, come on, masked man, like, show up. I'm ready for the masked man to show up. I got a little taste of Carl in the woods. I want the full meal right now. And I think we're just kind of dragging this on between this, the camera scene, and then they go lay in the bed. It's just too long in this time to before, you can't hit someone with this good concept, this cool mask and all this stuff, and then drag them on for another 10 minutes. It's not good pacing.
So that'll go ahead and wrap up the first half of the movie. Before we do end, I think, we've kind of already mentioned what the 2.0 version of this, because I think more so than a concept, it's just an idea of you're a group, people show up that want to kill you. What do? It's very straightforward. And it's one of the more realistic concepts, if you look at what could and couldn't happen. So I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, though, which is just speed. They get right. Maybe you could even get rid of the entire intro, and the first scare is them getting to the house. And like that's just kind of the scare there. Or maybe I'd probably still have some intro that kind of would show the gang. I'd probably go from Carl and his gang's perspective more so than Sonny and Brad and following them, because I don't honestly make it more of like just a slasher where they just kind of show up. And then, from there, I'd have them get there. And then first night they show up and, within 15 minutes, you're making contact. And I think from there, it's just kind of a scramble. So I think that's what I would try and do. I have no clue what that story really looks like, because I would say of all of them, this is probably the one I put the least amount into. Because I think it can go a lot of ways. There's a lot of plot missing here, so I think you could embrace the social media element, which we've had a storyline for that, where it's almost kind of like pseudo scared, which could be there, or you could just embrace the slasher element. So I think there's a lot to go, but I think the big thing would just be, that 15-minute mark, you're almost kind of laying the cards out and that they're in the situation.
Yeah, I think what you need to do is, I'm a huge fan of, like, after going through all these movies, I'm a huge fan of just having the intro hook, with other characters. So you see these other people die. And I think really the biggest thing with this is we never really um explain the motivations of the killers. Because really they're killers. Like they want to just kill people. But people really like these characters and they want to know why they were after Sonny. And like it was like kind of given away. I was hinting at like the social media stuff. I was trying to make it like, hey, is it related to the clown in the first window? Try and get the viewer to think a little bit, because then it comes back at the end with the cliffhanger. Um, it was more, in my mind, it was like, all right, well, what are your thoughts on that? But really, people just want to know what the real motivations of the mass killer were. I think you can do that. They're on the run or something, or they have drugs and there's like people in there, or they're just sadistic people. But I think you can identify that through the first intro of just a separate people out there in the woods, and they break in there, and they kill them, or they're on the run or something. You can give them some sort of motivation through that intro scene, so you can accomplish something startling to the audience. You get a good pop on the intro, and you can develop the killer's motivations, and then already what happened in these woods. So when they actually drive there, you don't need to have like these little touches where Carl and everyone's looking at him. You already know something bad's happening in these woods. The way I would do this one, the one I've been thinking about, is you could just make this a post-apocalyptic movie, like a dystopian movie. And these people like Brad and his girlfriend or a family is out there in the woods off the grid trying to survive the apocalypse. And then these people come up here and they're like, hey, you guys have supply, you have food, I'm going to try and break in. And you can easily do that. And put the creepy clown masks on them. Maybe these are apocalyptic dystopian clowns. Would work just fine. And I think you get a little bit of spice. But this is the thing. Lay the foundation first. Then you can kind of look at different scenarios to try and spice the story up, give it a little bit more depth. But you can't really do that unless you get the thing uploaded, and then you lay that foundation.
So coming soon, the Apocalypse Clown in Cabin 13. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and wrap up the first part of the scene-by-scene breakdown of The Girl in Cabin 13. Next episode, we're going to go ahead and hop into the rest of the movie. You can go ahead and take a look at this movie online for free on Tubi. Also, be sure to follow our Discord channel, because that's a place to be. If you want to be in these movies, help us make these movies, all of the fun stuff, because we make movies for our fans, with our fans. So until then, have a good one.